Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Brode from Deep Knowledge Investing. We provide actionable investment ideas and timely market commentary to family offices, hedge funds, portfolio managers. We help people get better returns in the equity portion of their portfolios. We're very happy today to be joined by Joe Jarabek. He's the president of Jarabek Company. It's a global government and business advisory firm, which he founded in 2009. His firm works with both legislative and executive branches of the government. Joe has over 20 years of experience as a political and business liaison at the state and national level. He's a former senior staff member on presidential races. He's worked in the White House before. He's represented the United States at foreign diplomatic events and has been on the road with party nominees dating back to 1999. Wow, Joe, that's over 2 decades. National publications of his work include the Washington Post, and they've referenced him and quoted him as an expert opinion. We're glad to have him as an expert opinion today. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here.
Just a reminder to everybody on the call, Niles Buchanan is hosting. If you have questions for Joe, just use the chat function, send the questions to Niles, he'll forward them to me, we can get them asked. Joe, we're gonna jump right in. At Deep Knowledge Investing, we've had a ton of coverage of cryptocurrencies. And actually, you know what, I'm going to interrupt myself. We're also happy to be joined. Stacey Elliott from the Crypto Investor and thestreetcrypto.com just joined us. Stacey, thanks for covering the call. Happy to have press coverage for this. On the topic of cryptocurrencies, we did a call last summer with the guys at Horizon Kinetics, Chris Bell and Peter Doyle, about Bitcoin. Last week, we did a call with Chris Bell and Michael Bisella of Block Tower, and we were talking about non-Bitcoin cryptocurrencies. Let's talk with you for a bit about how the industry looks at and participates in regulation.
Right, absolutely. This is a very interesting time for the industry because right now they are in the process of looking at a years-long piece of legislation to analyze the industry and determine legislatively at the federal level what makes most sense for regulation moving forward. And I think it's very interesting for those involved in crypto because for as much anonymity as they like, this is a situation where it absolutely makes sense to weigh in on the process because I'm sure that many of us can agree that anytime government touches something before the private sector has had its hands to work something through, odds are pretty good that it's not going to turn out the way we would like. And this is one of those situations too where I believe that crypto and those involved with it need to build those relationships to have that dialogue because there is the opportunity now to work through what crypto is going to look like in the future. Once the rules and regulations are set, any movement beyond that is going to be very hard to achieve.
Okay. So in terms of setting the regulations, what do you think happens first? It looks like we've got sort of 3 options. Right now, there's not a whole lot of regulation. There's certainly talk of federal regulation. There are some countries that have started to crack down. And I know you've mentioned in previous calls that there's the possibility of state regulation. What do you think happens first? How does this play out?
Well, it's interesting. This is a great game of the chicken and the egg. The federal government is looking at the states and the states are looking at the federal government. And with that, one of the things I would like to give a shout out to the street because of some of the content that they're putting out in regard to crypto and what is happening nationally, I think is phenomenal. That said, looking at states like Florida, New York, Wyoming, and Texas, they're trying to put in an express lane to attract crypto investors and the industry to those states to go ahead and operate. I also believe outside of those 4 states, there's going to be a 5th state that jumps on board with that. I am not at liberty to say which state that will be at this point, but I think odds are very good in the next month that we're going to see legislation coming from a 5th state in that regard. I also do not think that's going to be the end either, because the states are looking at crypto the same way they look at many other industries, whether it be gaming or other things that are taxed and regulated as another way, another source of revenue. And from what they're seeing, especially in the millennials and the younger crowd that is also heavily involved in this and interested in this, it's interesting because we're seeing 2 sides of it. Those of the adults in the room, if you will, and those of the younger set and the kids that both have an interest in this, that want to see this continue to move forward. I do not see the feds veering off of their current timeline. They have set 1 year as the timeline to move forward with legislation, to study the industry, and then draw legislation around what they've studied in the previous year. I think that they're waiting to see what a lot of the states do. Because for all practical purposes, crypto right now is to some degree the Wild West. I believe the feds are definitely taking their time and moving, because we see these 4 states that are moving in a positive direction toward crypto. West Virginia, different story, but there will be other states. And then the question then comes into is, how else is crypto being used? Where can they regulate it? Where should they not regulate it? And I think there are more questions than there are answers right now, which is very, very good for the crypto industry.
Yeah, you're right. Uncertainty right now is definitely the friend of people who are early adopters, right? And in the absence of specific regulations saying you can't, people are going to continue to invest. Let me ask you a question. You mentioned just a minute ago that you think the federal government is sitting back and waiting to see what happens with the states. So let's look at the 2 different avenues of action that we have right now. You just talked about 4 states that are maybe on the verge of coming out with pro-crypto, kind of laissez-faire regulation, specifically allowing this. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, one of the things we've talked about on prior calls is the trend by large institutions. We're starting to see large firms, hedge funds, pension funds, mutual funds getting involved in the cryptocurrency space. And so you have large institutions that are buying, you have states that are going to start issuing laissez-faire regulations. At what point does this become a fait accompli where a government crackdown becomes really infeasible because you're trying to stop something that already has taken over so much of the economy?
Well, and that's where, if I'm involved in crypto right now, I am taking the entire situation and I am injecting it with steroids. Because the more that happens at the state level, the more that businesses and companies are interacting and using crypto, the more, I think I saw, was it last week, Goldman Sachs has an investment desk around crypto now. So, there's different things that are happening out there that, to your point, I agree. But I also think, to a degree, that's what the feds are interested in. Government either likes to do nothing, look like they're doing something, or actually do something. And in this scenario, I believe they like to look like they're doing something. Therefore, if things get too far out of whack, they can always rein it in. And that'll be the time that we see legislation come down that may be a little more strict. But short of that, I think because of the lack of understanding in terms of how to use it, how to regulate it, et cetera, that it's still going to be pretty wide open for a while. And if I'm involved in the industry, I'm taking full advantage of that.
That makes sense. You were talking about Goldman having a crypto trading desk. Feel free to pass on this question if it's too sensitive, but given the number of former Goldman employees who have been at very high levels of government, any thought that will provide some insurance?
Well, I believe that a lot of the big financials will be weighing in, especially as they continue to make the move in the direction it appears that things are heading right now. There's no doubt about it that they will be involved and influential in the process. And they should have a say in the process too. I firmly believe they do. Now, in terms of legislators or the administration being pushed around by them, I don't see that happening. And that's probably not the tack that I would take if I were any of those entities looking to interact and interface with government at this point in time in regard to this issue.
On that topic, there are people who have concerns that the US government will ban cryptocurrencies. We don't think that's likely, but there are people who are worried about it. It would be kind of interesting that a government agency, the SEC, approved the Coinbase IPO. How do you approve a company that provides liquidity and trading and custody of cryptocurrencies and then make that business illegal?
Well, that's an excellent question, Gary, and I believe that's forecasting. I really, really do, because once the cat's out of the bag, I'm not saying 100% that that is a guarantee that that will happen, that they will move in that direction. But I believe, based off the indications currently thus far, that that is the direction they will be taking.
Gotcha. Okay. We got a great question that came in from Ronnie Saletti. He's the CEO of Trade Duel. Ronnie, thanks for being on the call. Thanks for the great question. Joe, Ronnie wants to know if using cryptocurrency as a payment method, whether that would reduce or potentially eliminate domestic corporate operation risk for regulated industries like online gambling. So we have talked about online gaming in prior calls. Does it make a difference if you're engaged in some sort of legal US-based online gaming, whether you're getting payment in US dollars or cryptocurrency?
Right, and that's an excellent question, because that is going to be a very big debate, not just at the federal level, but also at the state level. Because you look at, well, I think there's 30 states right now that allow some type of gaming, if you will. And it's a very viable resource for them to do business. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult, probably more for the states than the federal government, to come down and weigh in on this, because of the level of support from the gaming industry, to be able to use it as a different avenue in terms of revenues, et cetera.
So I think that's a really interesting point, because when it comes to online gaming, we're seeing that it really is being handled from a regulatory point of view on a state-by-state basis. And the concern on cryptocurrencies, it will be handled at the federal level. And so it brings up a really interesting question. Why wouldn't these be handled in the same way?
Well, and that's just it. This is the give and take of our republic and our system. There are times when the states will be a little bit more trailblazing and move a little faster than the federal government, and vice versa. I believe on this, there is still a lot of wait and see that is going on. And that's why that if I'm an entity involved in crypto, I am pushing the envelope as much as possible right now, because everything that is being done right now is setting precedent in what they're going to look to in terms of when they do try to create some type of rules and regulations around this. So I think the broader of a stroke that we can paint, the more colors that we can use in the picture, the better it's going to be, and the more feasible it's going to be for government to work with the industry and figure out a way to regulate.
Got it. Great question. Follow-up for you from Stacey Elliott at the Street Crypto. She wants to know, what kind of activity are you seeing among government officials to educate themselves about cryptocurrencies?
Well, I'll tell you, it's and again, this is a little bit of a lag and the delay in government, as well as the hurry up and stop as well. Whatever the issue of the day is may not be the issue tomorrow, et cetera. But I'll tell you, it's fascinating. I won't name names to protect everyone's anonymity, but I've talked with many legislators, older, younger, male, female, et cetera, and the majority of which have very little, if any, education around crypto whatsoever. If we break that down a little bit further, legislators that are involved in the financial world, whether it's through their own personal assets or where they work, et cetera, at that point, there's only a blip in the radar in terms of those that have any type of true understanding. A lot of these legislators, I found in talking with them, that after we spoke, have gone back to their staff who were in their 20s, and their staff have been educating them on cryptocurrency.
All right, well, given that we've covered this so closely, if you're talking to anyone in Congress who needs a better education on this, send them to Deep Knowledge Investing. We have experts on our board of advisors, previous programming. We're happy to help them understand the space.
I would be happy to send them your way. I don't know if you want the burden, but I will send them your way.
Follow-up question from Ronnie Saletti from Trade Duel. We were talking a minute ago about online gambling. Let's shift that a little bit. Let's talk about fantasy investing, like DraftKings. Has the SEC issued any kind of guidance or regulation on that? And any thoughts on the SEC potentially regulating fantasy investing? So imagine a situation where instead of investing, buying XYZ stock, there'd be some sort of betting pool where people would be betting on the direction of the stock?
Very good question. And I think that's something, to my knowledge, I have not been made aware of as something in terms of a policy issue or something that people are paying attention to at this point in time. It's a fascinating question and a fascinating concept. And at this current point in time, I don't think that there is a solid answer to it. Again, unregulated, no rules around. I would always follow the guidance of the SEC on anything that I do. But up until this point, I wouldn't see why that wouldn't be an option, and or again, another great legislative idea for something again for the states and the federal government to look at.
Yeah, we agree with you. Certainly we respect the SEC and always advise that people follow all regulations. Given some of the changes in the market, some of these new business models, it's hard to know what is and isn't legal in some of those situations. I think that can be tricky for people. Let's move on a little bit and talk about the infrastructure bill. That's the way that's potentially looked has changed over the last few months. Doesn't look like there's a whole lot of compromise going on. What do you think it looks like right now? What do you think actually gets done?
This is going to be the administration's toughest, biggest, hardest haul. This is their Waterloo. I think in terms of when you look at the political calendar, where we stand this year, next year, heading into the midterms, I believe this will be something that they put all of their political will behind to try and move so that it's a victory for the White House and it's a victory for the Democrats in Congress. Now, that said, I'm still not convinced that they're going to have the votes under the current package. We know as things stand right now that there's little to no Republican support for any piece of the package whatsoever, outside of true dollars that are flowing into shovel-ready infrastructure projects. That said, the question is going to be, Joe Manchin in the Senate is someone to watch on this. There are still many members of Congress, Democrats that are sitting in Republican districts. See which way they go on this. Are they going to be the sacrificial lamb, or are they going to look at self-preservation as the best way of moving forward? And where the debate stands right now, I don't think that we have enough direction as to where exactly that is going to go. That said, if Manchin does what I think he's going to do and try and find some middle ground between where the Democrats and Republicans are, if they can make Manchin happy, I could see them move something out of the Senate. The House to this point is still up in the air. I do think they will get some type of infrastructure package between now and the midterms. I would put that at a low probability of 40 to maybe 60%, just based on politics right now. We're also heading into redistricting in a lot of states as well. So it's feasible, but I don't see it being completely the way it looks today.
You were talking a minute ago about shovel-ready projects. One of the things that people are talking about, because spending money on infrastructure always sounds like a good idea, right? Everybody likes to talk about crumbling bridges and roads. Nobody wants a bridge to collapse. No one wants to drive on bad roads. It always seems like a good idea. But from what we've read, whether it's 2 trillion, 3 trillion, it looks like very little of that money is actually going to go to building or improving infrastructure. That it's called an infrastructure bill, but most of that money is going to other priorities. What are you seeing on that?
Correct. I believe it's 7% of the bill is actually slated to go toward infrastructure. The remaining portion of the bill are policy items that are important to this administration, the direction they would like to change and take the country. But yes, there's not much in there, and there's not much as everybody would think. And even with the bill being as much as it is, and that only being 7%, once you divide that equally across the states, it goes into individual departments of transportation, et cetera. That number is not going to be all that large when it's all said and done. Will it provide some impact? Absolutely. I'm in agreement. Roads and bridges, we need to work on them. Infrastructure needs worked on. But anything overly meaningful outside of the, if you will, the 911 distress signals at certain bridges and roads that we have across the country, short of that, anything major changing, I just don't see it.
Well, Jill, let me ask you a strategy question. Let's say you're right about this, and let's say the White House wants to get an infrastructure bill done before the midterms, and they want to claim a victory. Let's further say that actual spending on infrastructure, bridges, roads, the stuff we're talking about, is politically popular on both sides of the aisle. And let's further stipulate that the reason there is resistance to the existing bill being discussed is because people are seeing $2 to $3 trillion in a supposedly infrastructure bill. And if 93% of it is being spent on partisan political priorities as opposed to infrastructure, right? That's why they're having trouble moving this forward. So if you were the Biden White House and you wanted to get this political win, why not pare the bill back and actually do, instead of a $3 trillion bill that's focused on political priorities, why not do a $500 billion bill that actually is focused on infrastructure? You'd get bipartisan support. You could announce the thing well before the midterms, actually build something, and still get that political win. Why not go that route?
I believe that they're looking at this as Rahm Emanuel once said, never let a good Travis go to waste, or a good crisis go to waste.
Right.
COVID has been, for them politically, one of the best possible things that could happen. It changed the face and shape of the presidential election in the last cycle. And it creates a situation now where there are abilities to do things that you typically wouldn't be able to do in normal times. I think the White House is looking at this in such a way that this isn't just an infrastructure bill out driving the agenda and moving the agenda forward. And for how important that is to them, and also understanding that there is a chance that they could lose the House and the Senate in the midterms, I think that they're looking at this as a Texas Hold'em all in. The chances of them paring it down and paring it back to a $500 million strictly infrastructure bill, I think we got a better chance of getting struck by lightning or hit by a bus today. If anything, I could see the dollar amount staying the same on the bill, but changing the formula in terms of percentage of actual projects that would go to infrastructure related items. I don't know that they would do it, but if they were to come up to something of 50-50 or a 60-40 on that, I think the Republicans would have at least be willing to listen and potentially move. But the question is going to come down to, it's just like the rest of this. It's gunfight at the OK Corral and who flinches first.
Right. The reason we're suggesting it is because it would be a way for the administration to claim that political win. It also would be a way for them to gather a large amount of Republican support, because Republican districts would be in favor of that kind of spending. And I think the value of being able to claim a bipartisan infrastructure bill ahead of the midterms might actually prevent the potential losses that you were just talking about. To us, it seems like a way to claim an easy win and get a lot of participation from the other side, and then claim that bipartisan participation as like an added victory. Why not go that route?
I believe because it's more about the overall agenda than it is the individual piece of legislation, if that makes sense. And in order to drive the agenda, this piece of legislation provides the vehicle to move many different pieces of the agenda in one fell swoop versus taking on each of these pieces individually. They want all of them, but they know if they break it down that they're going to have a lot of lumps and a lot of hard fights and probably not win a lot of those battles. But if you package it all together and you put a little cherry on top and saying that there's infrastructure here, that's more of their MO, and I believe the direction they're heading.
Well, from a strategic point of view, we can see why something like that might make sense. What what's your best guess on the timing for something like this? Actually, let's go back. Do you think something gets done or not at all? Because you're talking really about a Texas Hold'em, win big or lose entirely.
Mhm.
And if that's the strategy they're following, they may have the votes for it. Um, what do you think happens? Do the Democrats win big on this, or do they go home empty-handed?
At this point in time, it's hard to say. I think a lot's going to come down to the swing votes looking ahead. But I will say, if they do not get something put together before the end of this year, the chances and likelihood of anything coming together next year dramatically diminishes. I would go as far to say if they don't have something in place that is passed at least one chamber before the end of summer, that they're going to have extreme issues moving it in the fall. And I think they are going to go all in on this politically. They will double down on it, and they will do everything in their power to see that this moves. With that all being said, being that they are in control right now and being that they do a great job of whipping their members into votes, I think that there's a better than average chance that we do see something.
Yeah, we see it the same way. In the end, the Democrats do have the votes, and historically, you're right. When it comes to enforcing party discipline on really big picture ideas, they've been extremely effective. At least
Absolutely.
historically, that's been the case. They've gotten votes passed on very thin margins before, and they probably will again on this.
Agreed.
Okay. So we always want to be respectful of people's time. We're going to wrap up here, but to everybody listening, please tune in exactly 1 week from today, next Wednesday, that's the 19th at noon. We're going to have part 2 of this conversation with Joe Jarabek of Jarabek & Co. We're going to be covering the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Deep Knowledge Investing has been writing on the alternative finance space. We're going to talk about regulation there. And then a topic that is getting a ton of attention, we're going to talk about cannabis and banking legislation. Can that prevent the industry from growing? For anyone who is interested in those topics, feel free to email me questions. We'll get them asked on the next call. And for anyone who's interested in talking with Joe further or talking with them about their political consulting or lobbying, just get in touch with me. We will put you in touch with Joe right away. Joe, thanks for joining us today. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Gary. It's truly a pleasure.
All right. Thanks, everyone. You can feel free to disconnect and